I'm here with the all-new RPM Friction Pro, a brand new paddle launched by James Ignatowich, designed by James Ignatowich. I'm super impressed, especially for the price point, and you can figure out whether or not this paddle is gonna be right for you. The RPM Friction Pro, like many other paddles out there, comes in two shapes. You have your elongated, which is the more rectangular shape. It's a tiny bit longer, has a little bit of a longer handle. And then your standard, which is the square shape, a little bit shorter, a little bit of a shorter handle. These are pretty standard. You'll find a lot of other paddles out there in the market that share these exact shapes. So really the only difference is literally the shape. The technology in both these is exactly the same. Each one also comes in a 14 millimeter and a 16 millimeter variant. Now the one thing I'll say to start off about the thickness that you choose is that in today's paddle construction, the thickness doesn't matter as much as it used to. So usually in the past, we would go with a 14 millimeter paddle is gonna give you a little bit more pop, a little bit more spin, and the 16 millimeter paddle is gonna give you a little bit more control, but you'll get a little bit less power and spin as a trade-off. With the new technology that has foam in the edge, you're not really seeing a ton of difference between the 14 and the 16. In my opinion, they're pretty similar. And I'll actually sometimes play with a 14 millimeter and a 16 millimeter interchangeably, and I don't really notice too much of a difference in my game. But the one thing I will say that you want to pay attention to is the grip size. A 14 millimeter paddle is going to have a little bit of a smaller grip, a smaller handle on the circumference, and a 16 millimeter paddle is going to have a little bit of a thicker grip. So that just comes down to personal preference. The first thing that I noticed out of the box is that these paddles are gritty. So you don't have to worry about coming out with a bald paddle. You're gonna get nice bite on it from that grit that you get. You have the standard raw carbon fiber surface. Most paddles are doing that nowadays. The first thing that I do when I open up or try a new paddle these days is I feel around the edge and I press in with my thumb. And the reason for that is because in the quote unquote Gen 3 construction, you have a channel of foam that goes around the edge of the paddle here. So it's probably about that thick, where you have your polypropylene core here, and then you have a channel of foam that almost suspends the core. And so what that does, it allows the ball to sink into it a little bit more, so you get more spin, more dwell time, and a little bit more pop. And then it also is gonna be exaggerated when you take a big swing. It's gonna sink in more because the foam's gonna contract more, versus a small swing, it's not gonna sink in as much. So that means that the paddle almost knows what kind of shot you're gonna hit. And what I noticed when I pressed in here on the edge is that it's a lot softer here. So there's a little more give in the edge there than I see on some of the other paddles out of the box. So think, for example, your Yola Pro 4 or your Gen 3 Yola, Franklin C45. Those are some of the other paddles out there on the market right now that use that construction on the edge. And those tend to be a little bit firmer. Now the thing is, there's always a break-in period with these types of paddles that have that foam channel there. These paddles are pretty much brand new, so I haven't gotten a chance to play extensively with it yet. They literally just came out. So I'm not really sure how it's gonna end up breaking in and how much softer it's gonna get, but typically when you break in one of these paddles that has the foam edge, it's gonna get softer over time on the edge. This one felt softer out of the box, so almost like a quote unquote broken in paddle. So I think because of that, out of the box, the paddle has a little more of that hollow sound, that thud sound. That sound that, you know, when you're playing with some of these other paddles, they have a much more high pitched, sort of like a ping sound in the beginning out of the box. And then that sound slowly hollows out as you play with it, as the paddle breaks in a little bit more. These had more of that hollowed out sound, and really that's kind of what you want. For the most part, players now feel like they prefer the broken in paddle, right? That's more anecdotally, and especially coming from more of a high level 5.0 plus player in the 5.0 plus community, it seems like most players prefer that broken in paddle versus the brand new one. So we have that response out of the box. I think it sounds nice, and you get a little bit of a softer feel. So that's the first thing I noticed when I started hitting with it, is it's a little bit softer out of the box than some of the other paddles that share a similar core construction. Usually it's gonna be a little bit firmer out of the box. These ones are very, very soft. So what I found was that I wasn't getting quite as much power as I would on some of the other paddles, but the spin was unmatched. I think that this might actually be the spinniest paddle that I've played with. And I think a lot of that is because you have that softer channel around the edge here where this foam just feels to the touch a little bit softer. Now that's not the science of it. I'm not sure how much softer it is than some of the other paddles, but what I do know is that it definitely felt softer and it made a much more hollow sound than I was expecting off the bat. Again, I'm not getting unmatched power, but I am getting unmatched spin. Hence the name RPM, literally revolutions per minute is that acronym there. And that's how many revolutions you're gonna get on the ball. That just speaks right to it. I felt that when I was hitting my dinks, I got a lot more bite, especially on my backhand dinks. I was channeling my inner James Ignatowich there. And usually when you're hitting a top spin dink, you do get some of those forward rotations on the ball, but you're not necessarily gonna really see the ball dip. There's only so hard you can spin a ball forward, or backwards for that matter, off your paddle on a dink, but I definitely felt like I was getting more bite. I could take a bigger cut at it because the ball sunk in a little bit more. That grit really grabbed the ball, and I was getting those revolutions. I was able to really take advantage of those topspin dinks. For me, that's awesome. I'm around a 5.0 plus level player. My highest stupor recorded was a 5.8. So I love to play with topspin. I like to really take advantage of using different kinds of topspin on the dinks, on the drops, on my drives. I love it. So for me, that was perfect. And I really noticed that starting off with the dinks, was the first shots that I hit was those topspin dinks. As I moved back in the court, I'm hitting my topspin drops, I'm hitting my topspin drives. I immediately noticed that I was getting a lot more bite on the ball, a lot more RPMs, literally. That ball was dipping a lot faster, so it felt super comfortable. Now what that means as a player is you're gonna be able to take bigger cuts to the ball. So you can take a bigger swing and still remain under control. I definitely noticed that the spin was huge for me with these paddles, and it was more spin than I was getting playing with other paddles, and I was definitely able to bring the ball down to the court, especially on those drives where you're looking to get it to dip down below the level of the net. So in playing with the two different shapes, the elongated shape and the standard shape, there's definitely some differences in the way that they play. Typically, your standard shape's gonna have the bigger sweet spot because it's wider, there's more surface area, and it's gonna favor more of a control type game. The elongated paddle is gonna have a little bit of a smaller sweet spot, but it's gonna favor more of a power, more of a spin game. And the reason for that is because with an elongated paddle, you can whip a little bit more. So I have a little more leverage on the ball when I can come around more quickly this way, versus with the standard paddle, you don't have quite as much leverage, there's not as much whip here. So you're usually gonna find you're gonna get a little more power, a little more spin with the elongated paddle, at least off the baseline when you're taking some of those bigger swings. At the kitchen line, it might be a little bit more even. Now what I noticed was definitely the sweet spot. That was the first thing that I noticed. The standard shape has a much bigger sweet spot than the elongated shape. I was getting a few more missed hits with the elongated shape. Now for me, I'm not really gonna be too worried about that. I'm always gonna play with an elongated shape. I've always liked the elongated shape. That's just me, that's personal preference. I know tons of players that will only ever play with a standard shape. So again, it's just really personal preference at the end of the day. But I did notice that the sweet spot was smaller. For me, that's not really gonna be a deal breaker because the amount of spin I could generate on the drives and some of those bigger shots, I thought was a night and day difference. And actually this is more anecdotal and it's probably comes down to more user error than anything else. But I felt that from taking the same swing, I tended to hit my drives and my topspin drops a lot higher with the standard shape and a lot lower with the elongated shape. And I wasn't trying to adjust my swing or anything. I was literally just hitting balls, taking the same exact swing. And I felt that when I missed a little bit, overswung a little bit, the standard shape sent them high, the elongated shape sent them low. So it was missing high versus in the net. But I also felt like when I contacted it just right, I got way more dip and way more bite with the elongated shape. If you're more of a soft player, you like your drops, you like your dinks, you like your resets, and you like playing soft, the standard shape is probably gonna be for you. Also, if you're someone that doesn't really know how to use a lot of spin, maybe you're more of an intermediate player or a low advanced player and you haven't mastered topspin yet, but you just base your game all around that soft game and playing with those drops and those resets, but you still want the power on your counters, then the standard shape is probably gonna be a great option for you if you're not trying to prioritize the spin, you're not trying to prioritize the power. The elongated shape, I think, is gonna be great for singles players. If you're looking to really cover the court and maximize your topspin, it's gonna be great for tennis players. Generally, a longer shape is gonna be a little bit closer to a tennis racket because tennis rackets are actually much longer than a pickleball paddle. So if you're a tennis player, I'd probably go with an elongated shape. If you wanna prioritize topspin and power, I would go with the elongated shape. But it's just personal preference at the end of the day. And the price point is a huge selling point for these paddles. They retail for $249.99. Now, for some of you guys, that might sound like a lot, but the most expensive paddles out there are pushing $400 these days. You have some well over $300. To be able to get a little bit of a cheaper paddle without sacrificing the performance is huge. And again, I don't think that these paddles sacrifice on performance at all. In fact, I think that they're performing up there with all of the $300 paddles that I've tried and I've played with. They're just pricing them a little bit cheaper to make them more accessible and to be able to give everybody a paddle that performs just as good as anything else. There are a couple things that are more aesthetic and really don't affect performance at all, but you might notice about the paddle compared to some others. So for example, there's no logo or anything on the butt cap. It's just kind of this blank circle here. Doesn't really affect anything at all, but most paddles you'll see will have the logo down here on the bottom. In the past, they didn't always. It's more of a newer thing. A lot of the paddles will. And then the standard stock grip that it comes with, I personally felt like was a little bit slippery and was slipping in my hand a little bit after playing, but you're never gonna play with it anyway. I didn't put an overgrip on here. I will always play with an overgrip. I, in fact, have never played tennis or pickleball without using an overgrip, and the only reason I don't put overgrips on the paddles for reviews is so I can play with it right out of the box. But again, those two things are just things that, to me, might give it a little bit of a slightly less premium look. But other than that, and that's pure aesthetics, Everything else here is the exact same that you're gonna get out of a $300 paddle. For me, I'll take that. I'll take a grip that I'm not gonna use anyway that's a little bit slippery and no butt cap. I'll take that any day to save the amount of money you're gonna save by getting this paddle when there's literally zero compromise in performance. These are James Ignatowich's paddle. He designed them. Now, it's not a James Ignatowich signature paddle in the sense that it doesn't literally have his name on it, where a lot of times you'll see a quote unquote signature paddle that has someone's name on it. But where it does go above and beyond is that they were designed by him. So these paddles were designed in and out by one of the best players in the world. So that means that they were taking into account all of the things that a high-level pickleball player needs, right? And that's not just me saying it anecdotally, it's because I actually talked with him myself personally about the design process of these paddles. And they did a lot of testing on these, and they were being tested by literally one of the best players in the world. And he's giving the feedback on what needs to be changed, what needs to be updated, the technology, all of that is being designed by one of the best players in the world. Now, not every paddle company can say that from start to finish, it was designed and tested by a top pro player. In fact, a lot of the paddles out there were actually designed by players that were maybe 3.5s, 4.0s, and they have no pros that are sponsored that are testing and giving them feedback. And the only feedback they're getting is from low advanced level players. And to me, that's not enough. I think that if you really want to play with the best paddle for you, with a high quality paddle, you should be playing with something that's been tested and vetted through the design process by a very high level player. Only a handful of companies out there actually have that, where pros are being involved in the design process, and this is one of them. So this isn't just some paddle company that's popping up off the street. We see tons of them. It seems like almost every day there's a new paddle company. That's why I truly feel like there wasn't any performance sacrificed in the design, quality, playability of these paddles. And a lot of it just comes to that there was a top pro designing these and testing these from day one to now, the launch date, and he's actually playing with the paddle. So he's designing a paddle for himself that he wants to use to win tournaments and to play his absolute best. To wrap up, I think that these paddles are incredible. No sacrifice on performance here, despite the slightly lower price point. Incredible access to spin. The name literally is RPM, revolutions per minute, and I think that they nailed it. They nailed it with the spin, tons of dip on the ball, topspin drives, topspin dinks were absolutely incredible with these paddles, and I think it was the spinniest paddle that I've played with. If you want the most powerful paddle on the market, I don't think this is necessarily gonna be the paddle for you, but you also do want to make sure that you can control the amount of power that you're playing with. So if you're playing with a paddle where you just touch the ball and it flies, you shouldn't be playing with that paddle anyway. So I thought that in terms of balancing the power and spin, this really was perfect. If you're an advanced level player, I think it's definitely worth giving it a try, and I think you're probably gonna end up falling in love with it. Designed by one of the best players in the world. So it's got everything you need to take your game to the next level, whether you're a 3.0 or a 5.0 plus.